Hi everyone and welcome. Today I am joined by Robbie. He's an occupational therapist with a strong passion for mental health. Today we're going to be discussing key challenges in accessing psychosocial supports, but also the challenges that have been brought up by the NDIS legislative changes. If you find these videos useful, please remember to subscribe to my channel. I am planning to do many more conversations this year and hopefully you will enjoy them. So much, Robbie, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty, well, it would be great to start with the basics, and if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your role and your journey in the disability sector, that would be great.
Absolutely. So look, I've been a mental health OT now for 10 years, so it's quite a while, and I've worked in many different services. I've worked in sexual assault, domestic violence services. I've worked across several headspace services. I've done all sorts of functional recovery work, early psychosis support services. I've done critical incident management, all sorts of different stuff. I've been in the NDIS space now for a few years, and I sort of, in the beginning, I dabbled a bit and sort of walked away and came back and sort of come back and forth. But over the last couple of years, I've sort of said, nah, this is sort of where I enjoy the work the most. I love a challenge to my own detriment, and so I've come back into the NDIS space. There's a big gap in the amount of mental health OTs available across Australia. Yeah, so here I am trying to fill that gap.
Fantastic. And where have you always been drawn to mental health? What led you to make it the key part of the work that you do currently?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always had a very keen interest in mental health, and I remember myself as a student occupational therapist. I was probably about 2 years into my degree, and I was like, I don't know what an OT does. I'm very confused by what OT is, and I remember I did a couple of placements, and I was like, oh, it's not for me. I think the first one was in a home mods team, and then I did another one in a geriatric team as well. And although there was so much value, and like this didn't feel right to me. In my third year, I actually got placed at a headspace service, and yeah, that's where everything changed. I was like, yeah, this is the area of interest for me. This is comfortable for me. I was really intrigued by I guess mental health as a whole, and all the different presentations and all the diverse experiences of people that are experiencing mental health concerns in the space. And so I guess it's been very much the focus of my career. I've always worked in mental health, and I have been incredibly privileged and incredibly humbled to have been able to hear the stories of thousands of individuals across Australia with all sorts of, again, different mental health concerns. Yeah, and I wouldn't change it for the world, if I'm being honest.
You did mention that, it's a complex field, and sometimes it does require a lot of problem solving. And yeah, it's good that, we have someone like yourself in this industry here helping people. So it's really great. Alrighty, well, let's jump into the NDIS conversations. And this, I feel like most of my questions to you will be quite mouthful. So do you believe mental health and physical health are interconnected? And is it important for both to be considered when someone is seeking NDIS access?
Yeah, I love that we're starting with this one. So as we know, the NDIS can get hyper-focused on what's the primary disability, what's the secondary disability, and they sort of rank things and then fund things accordingly. And I just think that's a really just an absurd way to sort of conceptualize illness, disability, let alone mental health concerns. Research and literature tells us that people who have mental health conditions have really poor physical health issues as well. And over time, as if their illness worsens, their physical health will worsen, and vice versa as well. So it's really, I'll give you an example. I might get a referral for a functional capacity assessment for a person with a severe mental health disability, such as schizophrenia, for example. And again, they've got these comorbid issues. It's like the support coordinator will say, oh, they have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. They've also got osteoporosis, hypertension, diabetes. I read that, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. They, because of their schizophrenia, they might have these issues, or, they go hand in hand. And like I said, so research tells us that it's common in people with complex disabilities to have cognitive impacts on their brain, and therefore difficulty with understanding the need to eat healthy, let alone with monitoring nutrition intake, managing their insulin, and all that sort of stuff. And then you throw in the sort of cognitive layer around impulse control issues and self-monitoring and all that. And so when you've got something like, again, schizophrenia, and you've got these physical health issues, they go hand in hand, right? And you can't sort of recognize one and not the other, because then that just leads to poor outcomes, particularly for the psychosocial issue. And so, it sort of speaks to an underlying issue within the NDIS, that they don't really work in an early intervention or a preventative approach. It's more sort of just reactive and responsive to what's in front of them at that point in time. So, how beautiful would it be if somebody had a disability such as schizophrenia, and the funding body could look at that and say, well, okay, there's schizophrenia. The clinician, so me, has suggested something like exercise physiology, maybe some physiotherapy, maybe a nutritionist as well. My God, we need more nutritionists in the space. And we say, hey, dietitian. And we say, hey, let's fund that adequately from an early intervention approach. So this person then goes off, they see the dietitian, they see the exercise fees, they're losing weight, their metabolic state is being monitored and communicated with the GP, and they're seeing the OT for functional recovery work, the psychologist doing the mental health. And it's like there's this wonderful synergy between the mental health side of things and the physical health side of things. Over time, research tells us that when all things are being considered, so again, when you're working holistically across the physical and mental health, you're going to have better outcomes for these people. You're going to prevent the illness from worsening over time. You're going to prevent chronic health issues from resulting in things like people having their legs amputated, so their feet amputated, or ending up in hospital because they've had a heart attack, and then worsening from their psychosocial disability worsening as a result. So the two are interconnected, but unfortunately the funding bodies don't see that, and I think that ends up in poorer outcomes for clients, which is incredibly frustrating, incredibly sad, and I'd go as far as saying inhumane. But more sort of for us, it's really frustrating, because we see it and we say, hey, this is the issue. We can see like research and evidence, and all these journal articles that I've spent hours reading have said this is the way to approach it. But unfortunately, because the NDIS is so reactive and just sort of respond to what's right in front of them, and that primary disability, they don't really fund all the other things that people need. So they end up getting worse over time, and it creates this sort of negative loop of going in and out of hospital for their physical health issues, which then again worsens their mental health, and so on and so on. So yeah, it's quite frustrating.
My next question was going to be around what are the consequences about, if such a system such as an NDIS overlooks this vital connection and disregards that holistic approach, because as you pointed out, there is scientific evidence that those things are related. And I think it was recently I've learned that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think schizophrenia also causes cognitive impairment as it progresses. Is that correct?
Absolutely it is. And I mean, even if you think of something like impulse control, right, which falls under the executive functioning umbrella. So, a person with schizophrenia, when they're unwell, they might go to the shops and they've got $100 that they have to use to buy the milk, buy the bread, buy the vegetables, buy some meat, and come home. But they go into the shops and this wonderful package that's chocolate and it's shiny and it's alluring to me. I'm going to buy the chocolate and the chips and the drink. I'm going to go home and drink that, and then their physical health worsens, and rinse and repeat. I think as well, what I might add in terms of the flow on of this stuff, right? If you sort of think of the NDIS sort of is part of the healthcare system. Whether we choose to acknowledge it as part of it or not is a whole different thing, but it's part of the system, right? And so when the NDIS is neglecting things like the physical health side of things, and they're pushing it back onto Medicare providers, they're saying, go see an exercise physiologist, a physiotherapist, something like that, under an EPC, an enhanced primary care form, which is 5 sessions under Medicare in a 12-month period. I mean, what the hell does 5 sessions do? It's not very much. It's not very impactful. It's not effective, right? This is a person with complex needs, and it's not sufficient for their level of care. And look, I probably shouldn't have even brought up APCs, because don't get me started on how that's funded, and that's really inadequate. But I guess what I'm speaking to here is that when the systems aren't working together, people end up falling through their gaps, right? And when people fall through the gaps, the health outcomes are poorer, and then over time people get sicker. which long term ends up costing the government more money. So it's not, this sort of early intervention approach is something that's heavily neglected within the NDIS space. And I think that, I understand why in terms of funding and money, because there's not, infinite amounts of that. But unfortunately, there's no synergy between the primary health networks, between Medicare systems and the NDIS. And if we could create a world where there was that sort of cohesion, and again, coming back to what we started with, physical health outcomes and the mental health outcomes for people accessing support in Australia would be incredible.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. What you said there about it just being reactive and not preventative, and the fact that NDIS is part of a system and supposed to be integrated with Medicare and healthcare, things like that, but definitely could be so much better if it was the other way.
Absolutely. And then there's this notion of I don't know if you've heard of the concept of the missing middle. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can, but if you think of something like a Headspace service, right? Primary health service, age 12 to 25, you go there, you get support for depression, anxiety, whatever it may be. Then you've got tertiary level services, which are the hospital services, and I think NDIS fits sort of somewhere just above that. But the hospital level services, so you're acutely unwell, you've got really bad, physical health issues or mental health issues. You go to the hospital, you get your treatment, you get referred into community mental health outpatient services. 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, take care, bye-bye, and we're done, right? The person who's ended up in community mental health and is really severe, say they're okay for 12 months after that admission, and then they start to become a little bit unwell. They need to come back for support. They often get told by community mental health, you're not sick enough for our level of support. They then get sent to a local Headspace service, assuming they're age 12 to 25, that is. They get sent back to the Headspace service, and Headspace says, well, you're too unwell for us. We don't support people who've had, really bad illnesses like yours. And so this person is now in this missing middle. It's like, I'm too unwell for this early intervention primary level service, but I'm not unwell enough for this other end service. So I get stuck. What do? I'll go see my GP. 10 sessions of Medicare, mental health treatment plan. That's often insufficient, doesn't go very far. I mean, if you think of something like a borderline personality disorder, that's not, it's useful, but it's not going to make sustained change over time. And so this person ends up getting stuck over time. Again, like I said before, they end up getting sicker, they fall through the gaps, they need more help, no one gives it to them, they end up back in hospital, and the cycle repeats over time. And so imagine we had this system where the people who are in the missing middle aren't falling through the gaps. The same thing happens when you're coming out of hospital going into NDIS. They're often, the hospital systems are saying, not our problem, NDIS deal with that. NDIS is saying, no, it's not our problem, you're with the hospital, that's their problem, you deal with that. And so everyone's sort of just, palming things off to one another. And all it means is that a person gets stuck like a client with a really complex mental health issue, complex needs, who often can't advocate for themselves. Is getting lost in translation. They fall through the middle. They're part of that missing middle.
As you have pointed out, it would be absolutely fantastic to have something like that. Do you think that maybe foundational support is something that would kind of stand there to provide that level of support for individuals like that?
Look, I want to be optimistic and I want to be hopeful, and I want to say, fingers crossed. Will it happen? Will it eventuate? I don't know. I mean, again, all we're seeing at the moment is promises, which, these things are coming, foundational supports are coming, but in reality, what does that mean? People are just getting their funding cut, they're getting chucked off the scheme. You go to foundation, go to this thing that doesn't even exist yet, right? And so the federal government is, playing with fire at the moment, and I think, will foundational supports fix this? I don't know. There's been several promises over the last decade of things that were supposed to fix this missing middle, fix the gaps in mental health care. Nothing's done it yet. So let's see.
I think it's very clear at the moment what their priorities are, and it is about really preserving the funding, right? So budget cuts and just making sure that it's sustainable in the long run, and everything else is just on the sidelines, right? Let's step a little bit backwards. For those who don't really know, the mental health area, and can you just explain the key differences between the mental health occupational therapist and a general occupational therapist? And What are the potential consequences if not working with a mental health specialist when supporting someone with a psychosocial disability?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, look, I want to start by saying that OTs cover many, many, many different domains, right? So you've got pediatric OTs, AT, so assistive technology, complex home mods, you've got mental health, geriatric, neuro, you've got all sorts of different OTs, right? And all it means is that being an OT as part of that sort of subsector, I specialize in that. So I've got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, I've got extra training that allows me to work as a said OT, so mental health OT for me. So coming back to more specifically mental health OTs, again, we specialize in mental health diagnoses. We understand and recognize the, we're experts in identifying the safety and risk concerns related to function and functional capacity for clients with mental health concerns. So, I always say this to support coordinators when I meet with them. Sometimes I'll get a support coordinator who say to me, "Oh, Robbie, I've got this 6-year-old who has autism. Can you assist them?" And I say, "No, that's not me. Don't send that my way because I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And I don't ever want to pretend that I do. I support people from 12 onwards because I've got the experience to do that and I'm comfortable doing that. And so that anything outside of that is not my remit. And so, yeah, so when you're seeing a mental health OT, you've got a specialist in the mental health field who understands function, who understands functional capacity, and is able to really understand and speak to how the illness is impairing this person's overall function and their independence with day-to-day living.
So from your experience, how has the definition of permanent and significant disability evolved within NDIS eligibility, particularly for mental health conditions?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. And significant disability is again, it's interesting in the psychosocial space. You see, like people's recovery journeys they're not linear. They don't come out of hospital and slowly recover and get better, and that's it. They're cured. Bye bye. Take care. So often with psychosocial disability, people's recovery goes up, down, left, right. They may stabilize for a bit and then relapse. They may stabilize for years and then suddenly have an acute episode, which results in an even worse functional decline. Permanency has its place in disability provision and assessment, but it can create massive barriers for someone trying to get support through the NDIS. So if you think of something like depression, right? So in terms of the DSM, the screening manual that's used to diagnose all mental health condition, depression requires low mood and functional change over a 2-week period versus major depressive disorder, which requires persistent low mood for 6 to 12 months. Often people with major depressive disorder, they apply for the NDIS and their application is often rejected under the grounds that it is not a permanent lifelong disability. However, this person might have been severely depressed for 2 years, no access to support because, again, Medicare services are insufficient or run out. And on a functional level, this person has completely regressed. They're not showering, they're not leaving their house, they're not able to work, they've lost friendships. But because the NDIS don't believe that the condition is lifelong, then this person doesn't qualify for support. This person they end up getting passed between, like I said before, GP services, Medicare systems, or all sorts of different services which aren't equipped to provide the level of support they need. And over time, they end up in and out of hospital with more serious mental health conditions. Like people can develop a psychotic depression. That's often when the NDIS start to offer support. So again, the recognition of early intervention supports, I'd say non-existent. And this ends up being, people worsening and getting more sick, which bigger picture ends up costing the government more money to treat. But more importantly for the individual, they end up becoming really unwell, and the rate of recovery takes even longer when compared to having access earlier along their mental health journey. And so it's a tricky space and it's an interesting space because not by any means am I saying that the NDIS should absolutely, they read depression, that yep, you should be given funding. But when you've got a system that's based on the diagnosis, which very much is the case in the NDIS, so whatever you're diagnosed with, they sort of, yep, well, that must mean that you've got this issue, which means that you get access to this level of funds. What ends up happening is that people get lost, right? You can have 2 people with depression and they both present very differently. You might have one person who's depressed but still able to go out to the shop, still maintaining some level of function at work. And then, like I said, person number 2, not showering, not going out anymore. They're completely destabilized. It's like, well, the illness itself is a label, sure, but does it speak to the nuances of the illness and the impact? No. This is where the functional capacity assessments come in to sort of speak to the level of impairment and what that means. But unfortunately, the NDIS very much do hyper focus on the label, and that results in, I guess, what I just described.
Yeah, very tricky space, and obviously now with the legislative changes, they're bringing out the impairment notices, and now there's talks about the needs assessment. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how everything is integrated. Because if you mentioned, as you mentioned, it's their focus is on the disability. The impairment notices is obviously focusing on the impairment, and then the needs assessment is on the support needs. So it's kind of everything now that there's so much information that they will require. It's quite tricky. But do you think right now, currently, is it quite difficult for the person to seek access to NDIS? Have things changed for them?
Look, I want to be mindful in that I don't think it's ever been easy. I think it's always been difficult. And there's this huge burden put on people trying to access support through the NDIS to prove the legitimacy of their disability and the level of impairment. That often, as you would know, this often ends up costing people thousands of dollars to get reports, to get evidence, to get proof. Now, has it changed people's ability to get on board? I don't know, in my opinion, and I think anything I provide would be really anecdotal, but I will say that I personally have noticed a bit of an increase in people contacting my service to try to get on the scheme. And when I assess what's going on, I tell them there's forms that you can fill in yourself, get your GP to fill it in and whatnot. They're often told, no, my planner said I need a functional capacity assessment. I need to be able to do this. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I mean, it's been the case, but I've noticed a spike as of the last couple of, I'd say 3 months or so. So yeah, and again, I know that's anecdotal, but yeah, so it's a hard thing to speak to. But I think what is really, really obvious is that at the moment the government are very much just trying to save money, and they're trying to showcase the savings and the dollar figure. And if that means that you restrict people's access to support, then that means more money in the pocket. That means that we're able to say and highlight, look how much money we've saved over the last 3, 6, 12 months. So yeah, and then ultimately, again, it's at the cost of the consumer, of the people.
Well, you mentioned the budget cuts as the priority here. I mean, I agree with that too. And I personally support quite a lot of people with psychosocial disabilities myself, and I did notice lately that their plans get reviewed, and actually quite scary that some of the plan reviews go unnoticed, so the participant nor myself actually know about it until we receive a new plan with some budget cuts. And sometimes when we do request for some supports to be included, they come back to us with, well, this is not good value for money. And I've noticed this to be quite a popular one these days, honestly. What are your thoughts on that?
The notion of not good value for money is an interesting one, and I think I can only speak to this as a clinician. Anytime I complete a functional capacity assessment, any recommendation I make is based on evidence. It's based on research. It's based on literature. It's not based on dollar signs. It's not based on how much something costs. We often as in OTs, we often get stuck in this position where we know that the NDIS are all about value for money. But when we as healthcare providers are thinking about what's best for our clients, we're always trying to make sure that we're working based on evidence. We're based on research. Like what we started with today, we were talking about physical health impairments and the correlation with mental health impairments. And so if I had a person with schizophrenia and they're overweight and they're having all sorts of physical health issues, yeah, I'm going to be requesting exercise physiology. Just as an example, I'm going to request a dietitian. But then the NDIS read that and say, well, that's not part of their primary disability, so no. And if they somehow recognize, yes, this person has osteoporosis, if they do acknowledge that, it's luck of the draw, it's very inconsistent, and we get it across the air, and then they say, oh, no, that's not good value for money. I'm always confused as to what they think good value for money. Because to me, it's a blatant, we're just going to cut it and not fund it, period. It's not based on evidence, it's not based on research, it's just based on saving money.
It does seem kind of like the luck of the draw. when you do a request of certain support, even, like a professional clinician is saying this is, the scientifically proven, this is going to assist the person with their disability, and then they're just blatantly denying it is very concerning. But the other thing I've noticed too is that with the reduction in Medicare-funded counselor sessions, going from 20 to 10, that obviously also something that they are suggesting for people with psychosocial disabilities is to cut down psychology, let's say, but then they can access Medicare sessions. So what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so forgive me if I ramble and rant at this, because this really, really gets under my skin, right? And so it's interesting that so the NDIS is there to fund permanent lifelong disabilities, right? Schizophrenia, I'll just use that as an example because we've already discussed that. Schizophrenia, permanent lifelong disability. It's a mental health issue. One of the key things that you need to treat a mental health issue is a psychologist. And so to say, we're going to fund support work, we're going to fund psychosocial recovery coaching, we're going to fund OT, but we're not going to fund psychology because there's this other thing, this other service, this other funding body where you can go access that level of support, again, I think is negligent. And what happens, right, is this person is sent away. So they've got all the NDIS supports. They're all working quite cohesively. And often this clinician that's working under the mental health treatment plan is often invited on board. Come to the care team meetings, come, chat to us, whatever, let's email. But 10 sessions is not a lot of funding. It's not a lot of funding at all, right? So if that person then has to come along to a care meeting, I don't know, but I don't think they can bill under a mental health treatment plan to come along to that meeting. So that's time that they sort of are working for free. So they often say, no, I'm not going to do that, right? They don't come along. That's not because, that's not their fault. They should be paid for their time. They're an expert in the field and their time is valuable, right? And so sometimes you get clinicians who do come on board and unfortunately they just sit there, they participate and they engage and they provide a lot of insight, but they're not paid for their time. That's not right. That's not right, period. But the other side, right, is that you get the client, and more importantly, the client, they'll see this person for 10 sessions, they got schizophrenia, the issues are, again, permanent and lifelong. They get the 10 sessions, that's used up in 5 months, 6 months. It's like, okay, where do I go now? What do I do? Then the support coordinator is stuck in a situation where they're like, oh, we've got to go for review because there's no funding for psychology. Okay, we'll contact the OT, get them to do a functional capacity assessment. Support coordinator puts together a letter of support. Support workers put something together. Psychosocial recovery. Everyone's got to put together reports and compile, which is costing a lot of money. Everything gets put together. They go back to the NDIS. By then, the submission gets put in, and the NDIS says, sure, we'll contact you in 6 months. Now it's time for plan review because it's been a 12-month period and you're back to square one. This person's now gone 6 to 7 months without any support, like any psychology support under their treatment. It's dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. And what ends up happening is the therapists that are in the treating team, so whether it's someone like myself, positive behavior support, psychosocial recovery, whatever, we end up working in these sort of pseudo-psychology roles where it's, for example, I've done training in acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. I've worked in for 10 years. Yes, I can support, but it's not my area of expertise. I'm not supposed to do that psychological work like psychologists do. They have their area of expertise. They're the expert in that field. Let them do the work. Let me focus on function, because that's my job. And so when we're working again holistically, when everyone is doing their role beautifully, all that happens is we are supporting our clients or enabling recovery. And so when you start to push people outside of the funds for certain little pockets of therapy, pockets of support, you get inconsistencies and discrepancies with the level of support that they're getting. And again, people end up more unrolled. People end up falling through the gaps. Their needs aren't fully met. And so that puts pressures on, again, the other therapists, the support workers are stressing out because, like, hang on a sec, this person is psychotic, they're suicidal. I'm sitting with them day in, day out. I don't know how to manage this stuff. What do I do? Okay, behavior support, come in, see what you can do. Okay, but the behavior support's not doing the psychological interventions. So what happens? So everyone's sort of putting out spot fires until we can pull in the psychologist and say, this is your thing, deal with it, let us focus on our job. And again, it ends up just the client suffering for it. It's not working, and it's not appropriate, and it is unsafe. It's very unsafe.
It's interesting how you pointed out that, you pick up that role of trying to kind of be the counselor, or like pick up that role of assisting them and helping them with mental health, but it is not your area of expertise. And it's all good if the person has funding, but a lot of the time, because it's invisible disability, right? Sometimes they might not even have that much funding in their plan to have an OT on their team, or because of their disability, maybe they're just not willing to engage more than one person at a time, or, so their team is really, really small. So that obviously creates a lot of difficulties around kind of supporting their mental health as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've been in that position many, many, many times where I'm the only clinician on the team, and we've got somebody with extremely complex mental health issues. And the reason I'm the only one is sometimes it's because there's no funding. Sometimes it's we can't. There's long wait times to see someone. There's no one accessible nearby. All this person's burnt bridges. They don't, they people don't want to work with them. They're sometimes too complex, even for certain clinicians. They're too complex for certain support companies, whatever. And so I've often ended up being it's me and the support coordinator, and thank God for support coordinators. I often end up having to work with them to try to manage complexity. But what then that translates into is that my actual therapy isn't getting done. I'm not able to do the OT support that's required for this client. And it's frustrating because then, for 12 months, I'm putting out spot fires, I'm keeping this person safe, I'm coordinating things with the support coordinator, and it's tricky business, right? Then we come to the plan review, and guess what? Oh, well, they're saying that OT, okay, we'll fund that again. Support coordinator, sure. And I've made a case in my FCA. I've said, this is what we've dealt with over the last 12 months. Here's all the accounts. Here's all the risks here. Oh, okay, well, have a psychosocial recovery coach, and that's it. Oh, this isn't enough. We need more holistic support. We need somebody who, again, doing the psychology. We might need a social worker. We might need a dietitian. We might need whoever. We need more people to help support the mental health of this person to reduce the symptom impact, essentially, and help stabilize them and help their recovery journey. And so you can see I get quite passionate when we talk about this stuff, but it's incredibly frustrating.
Absolutely. I can completely understand. I do have quite a lot of complex mental health cases, and you might be spending years trying to just engage them with one support, and if they don't have the funding or anything to do a report, it definitely creates so much difficulty for them, and for their families and carers as well. So it's quite difficult. The fact that it is an invisible disability, and then maybe the NDIS workers, they don't really recognize it. They don't know how to approach this because it's just so wishy-washy. What do you see as the long-term societal and economical consequences of underfunding mental health services within NDIS and the broader disability sector?
My response is layered. I think that the human element, people are going to get more unwell. People are going to fall through the gaps, and people will become more sick over time, because when you're underfunding the level of support that's required and in line, again, like I can't stress this enough, in line with evidence, that's dangerous, and that's counterproductive, and that's often negligent, right? Because it creates this sense of insecurity and instability for clients, and it creates this safe of just, it's unsafe. It's just unsafe, right? And so when we pull the pin, we get people who are, again, unwell, who are falling through services. And then when you think of the financial side of things, I think as a whole, Australia, we're going to pay for it later. So right now, people, as we all know, they're getting their funds cut left, right, and centre. People being chucked off the scheme, and it's a whole schmozzle, and it's awful. These people who've had their funding suddenly cut, they're now without support. Without that support, without that consistency, without all those relationships that you just mentioned, it's taken years to build, over time. These people are going to get unwell, and they're going to regress. When they regress, they're going to become acutely unwell. That puts pressure back on the hospital systems. They end up in again, in hospital for extended periods of time. And then that costs the government even more money. And so I think this is incredibly short-sighted. And I think, again, it's dangerous. And I think it's putting such an unnecessary strain on hospital services. It ends up as well putting a strain on GPs who end up in a situation where it's like, okay, NDIS said no, or NDIS aren't supporting something. This person isn't suitable for, a mental health treatment plan. I can't wait time in our local community for private pay. Let's just say by some miracle, the person has money to pay for private supports. Is 12 months, 18 months, whatever it might be. So the GP ends up just seeing this client once a week. Let's have a quick chat. Make sure you're safe and okay. Here's some medication on you. So over time, that person ends up getting sicker because all of their needs aren't being met. Again, they're not seeing the dietitian to figure out, how do I eat properly? What am I, how am I looking after my physical? They're not seeing the exercise phys to get out, to walk, to lose weight. They're not seeing the physio to increase their mobility. They're not seeing the OT to build their functional capacity. They're not seeing the psychologist to talk about their mental health issues. So all of these things will just get worse and worse over time, which again creates a higher cost burden on the economy. If it was a situation where we were responding to evidence, where the NDIS is responding to evidence, okay, so Robbie, the clinician, has said, research tells us XYZ, it's what's necessary. Well, then we're going to fund XYZ at the rate that's being described. We go try it for 12 months. 12 months time, let's have a review. What's worked, what hasn't. Rather than sort of coming at it from a cost cutting, imagine they came at it and they said, what more do you need to help this person? What's missing to help this person's recovery journey? I mean, wonderful space to work in that would be. For them to be able to say, show me the research that says this works. Okay, let's fund it. Let's see how they go for 12 months. If it doesn't work, tell me why. Let's respond based on the human. Let's respond based on the person. Let's respond based on the illness rather than money. That's what's driving a lot of their decisions at the moment. So it's, again, people are going to get more and more. People continue to fall through the gaps and it will end up costing the Australian taxpayer a lot more money. It's inevitable.
When I was growing up in New Zealand, mental health wasn't really a thing 20 or over 25 years ago. And, over the years, obviously, we've become more aware of it. And it has become quite a big talking point. And do you think we're kind of at that stage where people largely acknowledge that, everyone at least once might experience an episode of depression, things like that, but we're not really doing enough with the funding?
So from memory, I think 1 in 4 Australians will experience a mental health issue across their lifetime, right? And so that's massive. That's a huge figure. And I think the funding bodies don't know how to respond to that. I mean, in the top, from memory, the top 10 illnesses in Australia, mental health, I think the number one killer of men is suicide. And forgive me, I can't remember the age range, but it's the number one killer of men. So mental health is prevalent. Mental health is here. It's real. It exists. It impacts people. It impacts people to varying degrees. And until the governments, until the funding bodies can really acknowledge and recognize this stuff is complex, it's nuanced, it's more than just labels, it's about the person, it's about their support networks, it's about their resilience, it's about their stress vulnerability levels and how they respond accordingly, then we're going to be in this constant rigmarole of sort of going back and forth of, well, we need more money, or we can't give you money, you don't fall into this bracket because of some silly reason, and people, again, they fall through the gaps, people get sick, and so on and so on. So I don't think that funding bodies have caught up. I don't think they know how to respond. There's plenty of evidence, there's plenty of research on how to do it, but how to fund it, how to pay for it, it's a big question mark, right? It's a big question mark. And unfortunately, and I don't want to get into this, but unfortunately there are political reasons behind a lot of this stuff as well. And so, we can see that. A lot of people can see it. When you've got people sort of standing in front of billboards and saying, hey, look at these numbers and look at the cost saving measures, and just it's awful, right? Because you're making people's health issues a political game, and you're not caring about the individuals. You're not caring about the Australians that are impacted by this stuff and just caring about the votes. Yeah, it's a really frustrating point. And I think I want to say though there are people in power who want to change, who are trying to do their bit, but the landscape is so complex and trying to navigate it all, it doesn't work. I mean, we don't have a situation, we don't have a system here in Australia where, you know, local government speaks to state, speaks to federal quite cohesively, things get done quite quickly, and again, in response to data, in response to trends, in response to research. That doesn't happen effectively, and so often we end up in the situation that we're in now, right? People end up, you know, in all the many cycles that I've repeated. And so the funding isn't adequately given.
So given this, what are the most effective strategies, I guess, for advocating for better mental health supports within the NDIS for the people with mental health disabilities?
And I love this question. So as a mental health OT, in all of my FCAs, as an example, I will always try to advocate in a manner that discusses risk of non-provision. I highlight the liability as well, and I acknowledge that if you don't fund this is a level of liability that you're carrying, and the responsibility NDIS falls on you. I like to discuss why as well other funding streams aren't suitable, and I always try to do this when I'm recommending psychology. So, and I do that preemptively because I know they're going to say, go get support under a mental treatment plan. So I'll explain why that might not be suitable, whether it's access related, whether it's number of sessions, whether it's, you know, the acuity, the chronicity of the illness, whatever. I'll speak to that in detail. Within the FCA, obviously, I have to highlight the functional impact of the illness, and this is really important. And I think this is what I think some people don't really understand this. This is why functional capacity assessments are so important, because the NDIS need to be able to say, okay, well, like I said before, there are two people with major depression, right? Person one is quite functional, person number two isn't, person number two needs more support. So as an OT, my job is to explain why. Why is it that this person can't function, and what is the level of impairment, right? And so because their function is impaired, this person needs all these different types of support. So I think really explaining, I always refer to it as the FID, the frequency, the intensity, and the duration. So in regards to the illness and the functional impairment, if you can speak to the frequency, the intensity, and the duration, you can really effectively highlight what the issue is and why something should be funded. I think that again, from there, we sort of talk about, I like to talk about a flow on of sort of the risk of non-provision, again, and talking to the safety, you know, issues, because often, you know, if they don't have access to a certain support, that might raise the safety, that might raise the risk concern, which obviously safety is key when it comes to mental health support and intervention. Now, in terms of providers, I think providers working together to drive meaningful change is quite tricky. I think that we know that it takes a village, right? It always takes a village. But unfortunately, a lot of the times providers, we're bogged down in administrative nonsense, which takes up so much time, from work, from meeting regularly, coordinating therapies, working collaboratively, and ultimately holistically with one another. Now, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, but instead of meeting once a fortnight, we may meet once every 8 weeks and rely on emails in between to communicate. And this isn't sort of holistic, person-centered way of working. But unfortunately, it's the nature of the space that we work in. Sort of we're stuck because this is the way that the systems require us to work, because there's not enough hours in the day. I do believe that like when people working in the NDI space can collaborate effectively, they can talk to one another, they share ideas and find common ground. There's so much power and influence in this. We can use our most powerful weapon, which is our collective voices, to advocate for those who can't advocate for themselves. We can engage in podcasts like this. We can attend community disability events. We can write to the NDIA and express our concerns. We can meet with our local members to shine a light on any gaps, concerns that we're having. I think through our voices, we can try to rally for change as well. There's so much power in the voices of those working in the space, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I always post things on there about concerns I might have or issues that I'm sort of seeing, and there's so much connection that I've been able to make over my time, because I've constantly getting inboxes from people, emails, people saying, "Hey, Robbie, I read that post. That was right. You're great. What are you doing about it? How did you respond? How did you problem solve that matter? What can I do? Can I help you? Can I coordinate with you? Can I?" And it's such a great thing because it's just been better outcomes for our clients. There's a sense of validation for us therapists and the support people that work in the space. Because we're all feeling the same way, we're all experiencing the same thing, and so when we're able to sort of connect and collaborate, we're able to share our experiences, we're able to advocate better, we're able to feel heard, we're able to feel recognized, but most importantly, we're able to get the message out there that this stuff is not working. There's an issue here. There's a fundamental issue. And I mean, I'm sure you've seen this yourself, like whether it's across LinkedIn or any social media platform, even the news now, the news is starting to change, the tone's starting to change, in that they're recognizing people are being thrown off the scheme, funds are being cut, there's an issue, people are getting sick, people are unfortunately dying by suicide because of the funds, because suddenly their supports are being cut and they've got nothing, they've got no one to help them. So I think these are really powerful ways of sort of getting the word out there, saying we need help, we need more, this system isn't working, there's too much red tape, whatever it might be. So through each other, we can try to make change. Through our voices, we can try to make change.
Absolutely. I think collaboration is definitely a key. And as you pointed out, that's right. Like, for example, as a sole provider, it does feel kind of isolating. But the intention is definitely there to get, kind of rally around certain topics in the area of concern, and then just approach maybe local MP, something like that, to kind of assist with whatever problem you're having. I think sometimes people forget that they actually do hold the power, and the more of us are in the space together, we want same things to change, then we can actually collaborate and at least to some extent make it a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You provide online supports, right? So based on your experience, what are the benefits of telehealth compared to traditional face-to-face support for people with mental health?
Look, I might share with you why I started the online OT. I think that this will answer your question quite nicely. So over my years, I've worked in many, as I said, many different mental health services, many different mental health spaces, and there's been moments across my career where I have seen people not be able to access support purely because of their postcode, their street address, their geographical location, and I think that is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, I've made referrals to local community mental health teams where people have been knocked back because it's like, no, actually, our cutoff is on this side of the street, not that side of the street. And it's like, really? Come on, that side of the street, that team has a 6-month wait. You have a 3-week wait. Why can't? No, because that's our cutoff point. I've heard of people. Well, I know of people who've had to wait 18 months to see a mental health OT, to see a psychologist, see whoever's needed, because they live in areas where they're not spoiled for choice. They don't live in a city area, I guess. And so I think, I thought to myself, how can I make a change? And I was thinking about this for a long time, to be honest. And then I attended an in-service where the presenter said that, and I'm pretty sure this was anecdotal, but they said that the average wait time is about 12 to 18 months for a mental health OT in Australia. And I thought, wow, that's wow, right? That just blew my mind. And so since I went back to the drawing board. I thought, well, how can I do this? And I thought, well, I like a challenge. Let's try doing this online support. And since establishing my business, I've been incredibly privileged to be able to connect with people all across Australia. And I mean, the amount of times I've had people referring to me, particularly support coordinators, and they'll say things like, "Oh, Robbie, it's a 18-month wait, 24-month wait, or books are completely closed in our area. We don't have mental health OTs. I've never connected with a mental health OT, just because there's no option in the local area." So I think telehealth is a great way to access support for people and minimize gaps related to service provision. I think that when we are able to offer telehealth support, we're maximizing power of choice for our participants as well. They're not they're not limited to, well, who's in your local area, right? They're not limited to who lives down the road or, in the same suburb. It's like, well, no, these are all providers you can actually see for support. I think as well, something that's really, really cool is that through telehealth, we're actually minimizing the amount of costing for clients, because you're not having to pay for travel costs. So, you just sort of fire up the camera and you jump to the session, you're ready to go. So, again, it's a great way to minimize access to support. I think it's an equitable way to work as well. I think it's incredibly person-centered. And I think that it's a way to just deliver support to people who often don't have much options. I mean, as I was saying, I've got clients that are in, on all the way as far west of Western Australia as you can get, the top of Cairns all the way down to Hobart and everything in between. And so, there are suburbs that I've heard of that I've never heard of in my life, and there are little pockets in Australia where, there are rural communities that have never heard of OT. They've never seen a psychologist. They don't have access to a psychiatrist. They've got to drive 400 kilometers to get to a psychiatrist or a GP or their local hospital or something like that. So, I think it's a really, really cool thing, and I'm very privileged to be able to sort of connect with people and offer some support based on, what they're needing rather than where they're geographically located. Telehealth has been around for a long time, right? But we can all agree that when COVID happened, it just shot through the roof, right? And it's so sad that it took a pandemic for everyone to sort of stop and think, how can we work differently? How can we work better? How can we shift our models of care? How can we allow research to tell us what we can and can't do, and what are the limitations to our service? And telehealth services really, really shut off during the pandemic. I think that unfortunately, when the pandemic kicked off, a lot of people had really bad experiences with telehealth because, to be honest, not everyone can do it. Not everyone can do telehealth services. Some people can be a bit awkward. Some people feel, disconnected. I'm not going to say it works for everyone in terms of the clients, the participants. Some people it's not suitable for. But again, during the pandemic, it was really interesting because a lot of doctors were propelled into this role that they're not comfortable with. And so I think that to some degree, that's left a bad taste in people's mouth when it comes to telehealth services. But when you can get it right, when you can do it right, you can really enable recovery for people and get people the support they need. I mean, all my service, all my systems are designed in a way where they're disability centered. I'm often collaborating with the support networks to try to ensure that the person's connecting and we're getting that sort of holistic style of support involved. So I'm sorry for the people that had a bad experience during the pandemic, but telehealth is here, and I really hope that more and more people open up to it, because it's a great way to access support and get some help for your mental health.
Well, it's an interesting one because largely, as you said, it hasn't been quite as explored before the pandemic, but obviously, the clunky period has passed, and even the practitioners themselves, in the initial stages, maybe they also weren't, were a little bit awkward or getting used to using that technology as well. But now that period has gone, everyone's just leaned in, right? And again, for those who that works for, it's just keeps getting better, right?
yeah, definitely. And I mean, again, how cool is it that people who have to travel hundreds of kilometers to see a clinician, see a health provider, you can just turn on your phone and click a button and you're seeing your health provider. I mean, you saved on petrol, you saved on time, you saved the hours of the day, you saved so much, and you're just able to connect and get the level of support that you need. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing with us maybe a recent success story that from your work with a client?
Okay, so
we need some positivity.
yeah. I feel like I've just been doom and gloom for the last 40 minutes or so, right? All right, so I might share this one. So look, I can't give away too much because of obviously privacy constraints, but I'll say that there was a client that I've been working with, and they're a young person, diagnosis of PTSD and ASD, pretty severe PTSD, I must say. The young person was referred to me about 6 months ago, and at the time when they were initially referred, they actually haven't taken a shower for close to 12 months. Okay, so quite a long time. They were obviously incredibly unwell, and were unable to function day to day. Through a lot of intervention, a lot of patience, a lot of explorative work, and a lot of persistence, and most importantly, tenacity from the client. This person just kept trying, and even though they had many setbacks along the way, they never gave up, which I think was a beautiful thing. We now have them in a position where they're taking a shower once a month, which is incredible when you've gone from 12 months of no showering to once a month showering, and where that's only growing over time. And so I'm really proud of my client. I'm really proud of my client with this, because it's been really stressful for them, and they've had to do a lot of work and look inwards, and that could be really difficult for somebody with a psychosocial disability. And so, to be able to sort of look inwards and work through trauma, and bring trauma up and talk about the trauma, and realign their sense of purpose, their values, to ultimately build their function and build their capacity, has just been a beautiful thing for me to witness. I've loved every moment working with this client. And I think what was really cool was this client said to me the other day, they jumped into a session with me and they're like, "Hey, Robbie, guess what?" I said, "What's that?" Like, "I had a haircut." And then they popped into the video, and I was like, "Oh my God, this person has taken a haircut for like 5 years." I was like, why? What happened? Just like, I just thought I would just try something different. I want to be different to who I was. I love that. I just absolutely love that.
Yeah, that's quite incredible to see people who strive to change for change, and you see those gains, and you can't help but feel so happy for them, just because you know how well you can see how difficult it is for them to do those tasks. So it's incredible to see those gains, definitely.
And I think
Yeah.
what was really cool was, there was a support worker who was actually on leave, extended leave, and they had been working with this client for a long time. And then I came on board. They were sort of out of the picture. Support worker comes on board. "Hey, Robbie, the client is now taking a shower. That's unbelievable. I can't believe that's happened. How did you do that?" Blah, blah. "Well, it's not me, it's them, right? I'm providing some strategies and some interventions and support, sure, but it's them. They're the one doing that." And then for the support worker to be able to say to me, "This is how they were. This is the extent of their incapacitation, of their functional decline, versus this is how they are now." I love that, and I loved reading that email. It brought so much more, and I I sometimes have to contain myself in sessions with clients, because I get really excited, really happy for them, but I need to be, the professional and calm and So it's interesting, but I think that's been a lovely success story for sure.
That's quite incredible. And obviously, as well, I think it's very important about what kind of people are around them as well. And that particular person is quite lucky to have you that, rooting on their side for them to gain those incredible, moments. And it's just, it's really, really great. And I have another fun question, and I guess if you could change one aspect of NDIS, what would it be and why?
Just one aspect. Look.
Let's be realistic.
This is a really, really hard question, and I think what I would absolutely love, is just to see the NDIS and the planners and everyone that's always harping on about funding. If we could just shift it to start to look at research. What's the evidence telling us? What does literature tell us is the best evidence? What is the best way to support clients with this level of incapacitation, with this functional decline, with this disability? I mean, it brings me so much joy just thinking of what we could achieve. We could achieve so much more for our clients. The outcomes would be better, the rates of recovery would be better, the rates of relapse would likely decrease, because we're working in an evidence-based model of care, not one that just puts funding before anything and the money before anything. So I think that's my thing. I think I'd love to see the NDIS respond better to research, and essentially regard clinicians' expertise on this stuff, and acknowledge that we only provide support. We only try to really make recommendations based on research and evidence, because we have to. That's how we're trained, and that's how we work.
Yeah, that would be amazing. You're welcome to talk a little bit more about yourself and the supports that you offer.
I feel like we've spoken about it throughout this interview, but I'll just say, yeah. So
Yeah.
the online OT, we support people with psychosocial disability as well as neurodiverse people located all across Australia. We predominantly service people who are accessing support through the NDIS. We have a bunch of people that are private paying, besides through private health insurance as well. And yeah, it's a mental health OT specific service, and we are growing, which is really lovely. And I'm hoping in the next year we'll be able to hire some more OTs, which would be really lovely. So we are accepting referrals, and I mean, people are welcome to visit our website. I don't know if you're going to do that little thing that pops up says this is our website. That'd be really cool. Yeah, and I mean, people are more than welcome to come have a look at the website and reach out if you have any questions.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on board and talking to us about mental health, and obviously taking so much time out of your busy schedule, because I'm sure you're supporting many, many people. I know occupational therapists, special mental health are in high demand, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, there you have it, guys. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video. And let me know in the comments below what are some of the topics that you would like to hear on this channel. And I'll see you in the next one.